We are glad to see you this morning and thankful for your presence. We have some that are away from us, but we're glad that some are back and thankful to God for that. I want to begin this morning with a lesson from a story in 1 Kings chapter 1. 1 Kings chapter 1, it picks up with the very last days of King David, a man familiar to us as Bible students. This translation begins, "Now King David was old and advanced in years, and although they covered him with clothes, he could not get warm. Therefore his servant said to him, 'Let a young woman be sought for my lord the king, and let her wait on the king and be in his service. Let her lie in your arms, that my lord the king may be warm.' And so they sought for a beautiful young woman throughout all the territory of Israel, and found Abishag the Shunammite, and brought her to the king. And the young woman was very beautiful, and she was of service to the king and attended to him, but the king knew her not." Every time we read this story, it reminds us, I think, of some realities in life and about the changing seasons of life. When you mention the name David, there are certain things that come to mind. David was a magnificent and striking character in the Bible. That's, of course, not a photograph of David. It's a photograph of Michelangelo's statue of David that's there in Florence, Italy. And that's always reminded me of a good picture of what an Italian thought David looked like. But David was a striking figure. When he was anointed by God, chosen by God to be king, you remember how that in 1 Samuel chapter 16 and verse 12, Jesse sent for David after David's brothers had been passed over. There has to be one more here. God sent me here, Samuel said. We got one younger. Bring him. And he was, as the contemporary English version puts it, healthy, good-looking boy with a sparkle in his eyes, and I'm sure that's right. He was a striking young man who grew up with his talents to be a man of many abilities. In 2 Samuel chapter 23 and verse 1, we have this description of David. "David, the son of Jesse, the anointed of God of Jacob, the sweet psalmist of Israel." You remember how that he was brought into Saul's service because he could play the harp. He had a beautiful voice, it seems, and certainly was a great comfort to Saul at one point in his life. David was also known in the Bible, if you read his story, as being quite a lover, if you will. He was a man who had a large family and a number of wives, as it turns out. In 2 Samuel chapter 13, we could read there the story of all of the wives that David had before he came to Jerusalem, while he was still yet at Hebron as a king in his early years. And so we have Ahinoam and Abigail and Maacah and Haggith and Abital and Eglah. Those are 6 wives at least that he had there. And then, of course, later on in chapter 5 and in verse 13, you remember how that when David came to Jerusalem, he had 11 sons born to him after the move to the capital at Jerusalem. So David was a man who had the attention of all of these wives and who had a large family. He was not just a lover but a fighter, as the old saying goes. And we read about his prowess in battle. Back in 1 Samuel chapter 18, he came to the attention of all Israel, as is captured in that famous poem, a song that the women sang to one another. Saul has slain his thousands, and David his 10,000s. You remember the story here in 1 Samuel 18. We'll not take time to tell it this morning, but how that by this point Saul is jealous of him, and he's trying to find a way to kill him without having to lay hands on him himself. And so he puts him in dangerous situations. And at one point, he promised him his daughter if he would kill 200 Philistines, or 100 Philistines, I should say. So David went out and killed 200 and brought proof back so that he might win the hand of the king's daughter. So David was certainly a man who was skilled in battle. Everybody knows the story in 1 Samuel 17, when David first really appears on the scene before all, when David killed Goliath, a giant of some 9.5 feet tall in stature, with heavy armor, who had intimidated the entirety of the Israelite army, including the king, until David, who was visiting the army, came, heard the challenge, went out and met the giant, not with armor, not with a sword, but with a shepherd's staff and a sling and 5 smooth stones that he picked up, with which he leveled the giant, took his own giant sword out and chopped his head off, and won the great victory. That's where David made his name. So David was a man of great physical courage and physical strength and prowess. But I'll tell you what happened to David. He got old. And there's a story in 2 Samuel, I should say, chapter 21 and verse 15, about an occasion when David got very tired, and he and his soldiers were fighting the Philistines, and one of the Philistine warriors was named Ishbi-Benob, who was of the descendants of Rephaim, and he tried to kill David. Ishbi-Benob was armed with a new sword and had his bronze spearhead alone weighed 7.5 pounds. Just the spearhead weighed 7.5 pounds. He was of the descendants of the giants that David had fought in his youth, and of Goliath he slew him. But on this occasion he was overmatched, and it was Abishai, his nephew, who came and rescued him from the Philistines. And that's when David's soldiers told him, "This is it. You will not go out again. We cannot let you risk your life in battle anymore. You give light to our nation, and we want that flame to keep burning." So they retired David. Again, what happened to David? He got old. Even David became old. And as we say, the fact is it could happen to any of us. It will happen to us if we live long enough. Nobody's immune from the passage of time. And that passage in Ecclesiastes 12, of course, is always on our minds. The modern translation reads this way, Ecclesiastes 12:1, "So remember your Creator while you are still young, before those dismal days and years come when you will say, 'I don't enjoy life.' That is when the light of the sun, the moon, and the stars will grow dim for you." I think that expression probably suggests not so much the difficulty of seeing. I think that's also included. But I think the dimness of the light in this passage probably means that our thinking becomes less clear than it used to be. We get fuzzy in our thinking. We don't see as clearly. The light is dimmed in that sense. And then he says there, the clouds will never pass away. I think the old translation says the clouds return after the rain. We sang this morning that great old hymn about how there's a rainbow in the clouds. And in a sense, that's certainly true. And as people who are spiritual and people who believe in God, there's always that rainbow in every cloudy situation. But I think in this case, what Solomon's talking about is something more physical. That you reach a stage in life when the clouds always return. I made this point before, but there's a stage in life when something hurts or when you're having trouble, you say to yourself, well, if this doesn't go away soon, I'm going to go to the doctor and get this fixed. That's the way we think. And then we reach a stage in life where there are things that hurt and things that trouble us and things that don't work anymore, and no doctor can fix it. He can give you a pill, and the pill will make you sleepy. So do you want to hurt or do you want to be awake? which one you want to do, because if you take the pill, then you're going to sleep your day away. And if you're awake, then you're going to hurt. That's old age for most people. That you reach a point where it just becomes pure old pain management. And how much can you stand? And how much can you take? So as we say, old age is not for sissies. That is certainly true. And I think that's what Solomon is recognizing here. There comes a point when the clouds, and we expect when the cloud comes, it's going to blow off and eventually get sunny again. What happens when the clouds are followed by clouds? Well, there can be that point in life. And there will be, no doubt, if we live long enough. Your arms that have protected you will tremble, verse 3, and your legs, now strong, will grow weak. And your teeth will be too few to chew your food, and your eyes too dim to see clearly, and your ears will be deaf to the noise of the street, and you'll barely be able to hear the mill as it grinds or the music as it plays. But even the song of a bird will wake you from your sleep. Don't sleep like we used to. Can't hear like we used to. Of course, hearing can affect people at different ages, loss of hearing and so on. But imagine if you reach a point where you just are in a world in which you cannot hear what's going on around you. How difficult that would be. Some people have to face that at a young age, admittedly. We're talking about in general terms. When life is going on around us and people are talking and laughing and involved in things, and we're over here in our world just sitting on the sideline, it's hard. That's not fun. That's difficult. To have to adjust to that kind of situation. You'll be afraid of high places. Walking will be dangerous. Your hair will turn white. I don't want to hear anything. And you'll hardly be able to drag yourself along. And all desire will be gone. And we will go on our final resting place, and there'll be mourning in the streets. So he's describing here in pretty obvious figures the process of aging, which is a process of dying, of leaving this life. And if you're here as a teenager, if you haven't already tuned me out, then likely you say, he's not talking to me. That'll never happen to me. I promise you. I'm talking to you. The writer of Ecclesiastes is talking to you. Remember in your youth, this is a passage to young people. By the way, this is a subject that I've been trying to talk about for a long time. I've been preaching on this subject since I was in my 20s. It means more to me now than it did then. But the point of this lesson is that this is the course of human nature. It's a strange thing. Hosea 7 in verse 9, he's talking about Israel there, and he says, foreigners are using up your strength, you don't realize it. You become a gray-haired old man, and you don't realize it. And he's comparing there the blindness of Israel with what happens to people, that people, wake up one day and they realize, wow, I've lived a lot of my life. If we go by the average lifespan, we don't know if we have tomorrow, frankly. But we look around and we realize, I used to talk about people my age being those old people. I is those old people now. As one fellow put it, inside every older person is a younger person wondering what happened. And in our society, we don't handle that very well, at least in our society. Maybe in some parts of the world they do a much better job. They can't do much worse. But we do tend to ignore older people, and we do tend to, even worse, treat them with contempt, like they're in the way, bothersome. Some of that's just pure old selfishness, and some of it, I think, maybe we don't want to think about the idea of aging and death. So wise young people do better than that. Wise young people are motivated by this reality to do certain things. In the first place, to exercise patience. Patience with those who are aging. Because, by the way, we're all just taking turns. And so as I deal with older relatives, older people, older co-workers, I'm motivated to remember the golden rule. As you would that men should do unto you, do ye even so unto them. And I don't want to be in a situation where in a few years I'm going to be mistreated and remember with sadness the way I treated others when the shoe was on the other foot. to have and show a sense of respect. That's what we're talking about, really, a sense of respect. The passages that always come to my mind are Leviticus 19:32, for example, where Moses taught, "You shall stand up before the gray head and honor the face of the old man and fear your God. I am the Lord." Israel was taught to honor age and those who are aged. And the New Testament likewise teaches that precept. 1 Timothy chapter 5, in verse 1, Paul writes to Timothy and he reminds him, never speak harshly to an older man, but appeal to him as he were your father, and treat young men like brothers and older women like mothers, and younger women like sisters with absolute purity. This is not mine. I found, these, along the years in research, but they were striking to me, and I thought I'd share them with you. Maybe a little too small for you to read, but this little blurb, an article, "I was raised to show respect," the author writes. "I was taught to knock before I opened a door, to say hello when I entered a room, to say please and thank you, and to have respect for my elders. I'd let another person have my seat if they needed it. I'd say yes, sir, and no, sir, and help others when they needed me to, and not stand on the sidelines and watch. Hold the door for the person behind me. Say excuse me when it's needed. And to love people for who they are and not what I could get out of them. Most importantly, I was raised to treat people exactly how I would like to be treated by others. It is called respect." One fellow put up 10 rules for respecting the elderly, in particular in reference to our section, to our study today. And these are his suggestions. Speak politely. I think that's biblical. No electronics when spoken to. That's a judgment. But it is not respectful when somebody, maybe your mother, your grandmother's trying to talk to you, anybody for that matter, and I'm over here on the phone. Now, maybe if we have a conversation and I need to reference something and you understand why, it's not polite to do that. It's disrespectful to other people. To look your elderly relatives in the eye, that's also important. To ask thoughtful questions and to give thoughtful responses instead of just barking back an answer. If an elderly person enters, then offer them your seat. Hold open doors and assist elderly people. If an older person drops something, pick it up and give it back. Call them on their birthday or wedding anniversary, he suggests. Call your grandparents occasionally just to talk. And then the last one here, this is the one I struggle with most. Respond to elderly family on social media and cell phones. I guess that means if they call you, call them back. I could go with that. But those are just common sense things, are they not? But showing respect, that's what a wise young person will do. And also, they will get themselves ready for their time. That's really what we're talking about. It's a critical time of life. Very few people prepare for old age. I mean, if they do any preparing at all, it might be in some sense material, financial. People say, well, I want to save up X amount of money for my old age. But Solomon talks about the vanity of all of that and how that you can pile up money and you don't know what's going to happen to that. Or even if you do give it to the person that you think is worthy of it, it may be gone. Who knows what they're going to do with it. So, but the idea of preparing mentally and spiritually for old age, that's what we're talking about here. So what do I need to face old age? Let me offer quickly a few thoughts along this line. I think one of the things that I'll need to face old age is I certainly will need patience. A patience with the changing seasons of life. I've often used, and I know some of you heard me use this several times, but over in the book of 2 Samuel 19, it's a critical moment here when David, having faced one of the greatest challenges of his life, the threat of Absalom was a real threat. So David has to flee Jerusalem, actually has to get out of Judah, goes across the river, goes to Mahanaim. And with the blessing of God, they win the battle and Absalom is killed. And so now David is going to return. He and those who were loyal to him return and he's met at the river by admirers. And one of the admirers that meets him there is an old man by the name, that goes with him, I should say there, is an old man by the name of Barzillai. The Barzillai lives across the river. And what we find is this. Let's just read the account quickly. Verse 31, Barzillai, the Gileadite, came down from Rogelim and went over Jordan with the king to conduct him over. Now, Barzillai was a very aged man, 80 years old. He was 80 years old, imagine that. But 80, can be one way or another. There's some people pretty spry at 80 or beyond. But in a fellow who lived before medicines that we have and some other advantages we have, not always. In Barzillai's case, it was certainly not the most invigorating time of his life, as he goes on to explain. Anyway, he was a very aged man, but he had provided the king sustenance while he lay at Mahanaim. He was a very wealthy man also. And it's just always struck me, that fact, that while David was in danger, that this old man who had lived his life, let's go ahead and read verse 33. The king came to him and he said, I want you to come over with me. I'm going to take you to Jerusalem. I'm going to feed you. I'm going to wine and dine you. I'm going to give you a good time. And he responds in verse 34 by saying to the king, with all respect, he said, how long do I have to live that I should go up with the king to Jerusalem? This day I'm 80 years old. Can I discern between good and evil? Can thy servant taste what I eat and what I drink? Can I hear any more the voice of singing men or singing women? Wherefore then should thy servant yet be a burden to my lord the king? I'll go a little way with you. But let me turn back, verse 37, that I may die in my own city and be buried by the grave of my father and my mother. If you want to do something for somebody, here's Kim Ham. You take him over there and show him a good time and honor him. But let me go back home, because my days of having the ambition of going to the big city and walking in those high circles is long gone. We reach a point where we realize that's just, if there was ever that time for us, it's not now. Our goals are much more immediate, much more limited. But what I find to be impressive about this man was that even though he was in that stage of life, and it would have been maybe easier for him just to close the blinds and say, I don't want to see this problem, I don't want to deal with this. When the crisis came, he answered the call. And when David needed a friend, he was a friend to the king, because that's the Lord's anointed. That's what I appreciate about him. Even though all those limits were upon him, that's the way he felt about it. God bless him for that. And I think in the book of 1 Chronicles, chapter 28, when we think about David, and his time would come not that many years later, and we find David's last days. And David has been told by the king, by God rather, I know you want to build me a temple. You're not going to build me a temple. And so we're just waiting now for Solomon to come. But David is not embittered by his circumstance, not embittered by his limitations. David patiently continues to serve God. And he said, God told me no. But in one of the last conversations that he had with Solomon, he made the point with Solomon that I have gathered these materials that you might use them. Use them well. Show yourself a man. It's a glorious picture here of the way a fellow ought to face the end of his life. Just use every bit of it that God gives for his service. This is off the chart a little bit here, but I'll just make this point. Just recently, not people that I know, but through the media, a couple of cases of people facing terminal illness who decided that, well, I'm not having fun anymore. I'll tell you what I think I'm going to do. I think I'm going to take poison and die. I don't have all the answers, guys, but I'm sure that it's not within my rights to decide the length of my life in a fashion like that. And I just think the absolute lack of godliness in all of that, the absolute lack of concern for the will of God and all that. Here were men who lived however many days they had and used it to the last moment to try to encourage right. It's going to take a patience and an endurance to be able to make it like that. I think about the obvious faith that they had in God, that faith that could not be denied. What did David say in Psalm 71? He said, you've been with me all these years, and now my only request is that you might be with me even in this hour. You've taught me from my youth, verse 17, and now, verse 18, I'm old and gray-headed. God, forsake me not until I have showed thy strength to this generation and thy power to every one that is to come. We need a sweetness about us as well, a contentedness with whatever limits we have. You know, Paul described himself in Philemon as Paul the aged. Well, he wrote Philippians at the same time, so I reckon he was just as aged when he wrote to the Philippians as he was when he wrote to Philemon. And the great contentment of Paul that comes across in this letter, written from prison, but written in such a way as to tell his hearers, look, don't feel sorry for me. That's Philippians chapter 1 and verse 12. The things that have happened to me have happened rather to the furtherance of the gospel. And he said, actually, the bad things that have happened to me have worked good in the brethren and have also helped me to spread his name throughout all the palace. Don't feel sorry for me. To me, to live is Christ. To me, to die is gain. You know what I need? I need to live every day of my life like that. And if God lets me live to be 112, I ain't counting on that, but if he does, I hope, God help me, that I can live even to my last day with a sense of contentedness that this is the will of the Lord. There's a reason why I'm here today. Let me use it for his glory. Because where I'm going, I want to use eternity for his glory. So let me use today for his glory, whatever today might bring. That desire to serve. Samuel had been really treated badly. Now, part of that was his family was not what it ought to be, but he was treated badly. He is indignant about that. You firing me? What have I done to deserve this? Who have I wronged? Just let him come up here and show me. For the end, what he said was, I brought this matter to God. He said, anoint a king. You want a king, you'll have a king. But I'll tell you this, I'm not going to quit trying to exhort you to serve your Lord and do what's right. We reach a stage in life when we may no longer be in the position we used to be, but wherever we are, we can, like David did, like Peter did. Peter said, it's not long before I put off this tabernacle, but I tell you, I want to use every moment that I have to be a reminder to you of who you serve and who you are. What a great thing. And when Paul wrote to Titus, he said, let those older men and older women find their place in encouraging and in teaching those who are younger about God. And let me mention one more thing. That is that toughness. Paul, the aged, he certainly was aged by the time he wrote 2 Timothy. I guess it was a few years after that first imprisonment that we read about. But he wrote to Timothy in this last letter these unforgettable words, thou therefore, my son, this is 2 Timothy 2 and verse 1, be strong in the grace that is in Christ Jesus, and the things that thou hast heard of me among many witnesses, the same commit thou to faithful men, who shall be able to teach others also. Thou therefore endure hardness as a good soldier of Jesus Christ. You got to be tough to be a soldier. And you got to be tough to be a soldier of the Lord. And you got to be tough to be an aged soldier of the Lord. It's not going to be easy every day. It may not be easy any day. But you bring that toughness that Paul instructed Timothy to have, that toughness that Paul had. That toughness that allowed Paul to write in those inspiring words in 2 Corinthians chapter 4, that we face a lot of troubles, but we're not distressed. We are perplexed, but not in despair. And I'll tell you why. Because though our outward man perish, our inward man is renewed day by day by day by day. We look not at the things that are seen, but at the things that are not seen. The things that are seen, they're temporary anyhow. You know, I'm getting older physically. Cars getting older. Houses getting older. Things get older. Things wear out and they're gone. But there's a part of us, the part that really, truly matters, the essence of who we are, that is renewed day by day by day. We don't look at the things that are seen as if that's all there is, but the things that are not seen. The things that are seen, they're temporary. The things that are not seen are eternal. And that thought motivates me every day. And the older I get, the more it ought to mean to us. And if it doesn't, something is desperately wrong. Old age is not a promise. No guarantee that I'll ever get there. I may be about as old as I'm going to be if you're 20 years old today, God forbid, but that may happen. But one thing is sure, I'm either going to die young or get old. Just the facts. So this subject is for me. Wherever I am on that scale, this subject is for me. Even David couldn't escape old age, and I need to be taught by his example and by the teaching of the Word of God. Those who are younger need to learn that patience. Consider themselves, lest they also be tempted, and show respect. And for those who are older, show the way. Show the way. Feel that responsibility to show young Christians what an older Christian looks like and what real faith looks like. Prepare you for that day. I think that's the best advice that instruction God can give me about this. Just prepare you for that day. I appreciate your kind attention. I hope this has been somewhat helpful. This is a subject that's been suggested, and I hope and pray that perhaps something in it will be of practical value. It's certainly a practical subject. If you haven't already, take your songbook out and turn to the number that's been selected. If it be your desire this morning to become a child of God, why not today? Why not today? Obey the gospel. Why not today confess his name? Maybe you're here as one who, as a child of God, has not been faithful to the Lord as you should. Then please make that right with him. And if we can help you in any way, let us know how right now while we stand and sing. Will you?